conjecture. You should have come up with something. It says if two angles form a linear pair, then what? What can you tell me about it?
The sum of their angles is 180 degrees.
The measures of the angles add up to 180 degrees. This is something you probably better have written down. Remember we talked about a conjecture list on Friday. This should be on a conjecture list. Now this shouldn't be necessarily in your notes. This should be on a separate section of your notes. Okay, so you should actually just have a list of conjectures. And this is, I think, like the second one. Okay, and eventually you're going to have a lot of conjectures. So if you have like a separate section in your notebook, that would be fine. Okay, but you're going to need quite a few pages. So don't just like put it at the end and think it's only going to take up like a page or two. Okay, but this is called the linear pair conjecture. Okay, the overlapping segments conjecture. The linear pair conjecture states that if two angles form a linear pair, the measures of the angles add up to 180 degrees. And that should make sense because they lie on a line. Okay, you know that a line equals 180 degrees. Okay, now for those of you that are done with that, you can go ahead and start copying that vertical angle conjecture as well, and then we're going to fill the blanks in as from that because that was your second investigation that you had. Okay, if two angles form a linear pair, then the measures of the angles add up to 180 degrees. Okay, now the vertical angles conjecture, you discovered that with the patty paper. And so what happened when you folded over that line? What did you notice about those angles? They were the exact same measure. And so then if two angles are vertical angles, then what can you conclude? They have equal measures. Or you could put they are congruent. So there's two things you could write down. You could either put they have equal measures, or you could write they are congruent. Same thing. So if two angles are vertical angles, now vertical angles are angles opposite each other. Alrighty, so what's going to happen is now we're going to go ahead and see what we have on the next slide here. We're going to talk about deductive arguments. And so notice it says the example, use the linear pair conjecture and the diagram at right to write a deductive argument explaining why angle 1 must be congruent to angle 3. So deductive, when I think of deductive, I think of when I was solving the algebra problem on Friday. Remember that? I started with like that and I had to justify adding and then subtracting and all that. So that's what a deductive argument is. So let's start with the linear pair conjecture. First of all, this is where I want to end. I want to end with 1 and 3. So I have to think about that. A linear pair that involves 1. What would a linear pair that involves angle 1 be? Angle 1 and what? 2. Okay? What would be another linear pair that involves angle 3? 3 and, how about we do 3 and 2? Oh. Okay, so let's start with that. That's the very first thing I'm going to start with. If it's a linear pair, what do I know about the measures? It adds up to what? 180. So let's just start. So since that's the case, I can conclude that angle 1 plus angle 2 is 180. And angle 2 plus angle 3 is 180, correct? What do you notice about both of those equations? Okay, what else? They both equal 180 degrees, right? So since they both equal 180 degrees, what can you do with them?
Big circle.
Mm-hmm. If they both equal 180 degrees, what do I know about angle 1 and 2 and angle 2 and 3? They're congruent or they are equal. So in other words, since both of them equal 180, they have to equal each other, right? So this is the conclusion I can make. Ah. What do you now notice?
they got the measure of angle too.
Don't each of them have a measure of angle 2 right here? Ah, so let's think about an algebraic equation. What can you do with that measure of angle 2? Subtract it out, and what does it leave you with? Angle 1 and angle 3, which is exactly what we kind of wanted to show. That's a deductive argument. Okay? You do a lot of algebra in there. That way you can kind of justify as you go from step to step. Now I know that's probably kind of weird. Some of you are probably like, I don't quite get it. Okay, that's the first one we looked at, and gradually we're going to look at more as we go along. Okay. So the final thing we're going to talk about today is about the converse. Okay? The converse of any statement basically switches the if-then part. The converse of any statement switches the if-then part. So I've got an example of a statement. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. We're going to write the converse from that, and then we're going to make a conclusion based on that. Is the converse true, or is it false? Switches the if-then parts of a statement. So notice I've highlighted some statements there, are some parts of the statement there. If two angles are vertical angles, then they are congruent. So I've highlighted the part that's with the if and the part that's with the then. So with the converse, we're flipping those around. So what should the converse be? What should go in this blank?
If two angles are congruent.
If two angles are congruent. So basically I've taken the then statement, right, and I've put it there. Now notice I can't say if they are congruent, right, because you'd be like, they, what are they? Okay, so I kind of have to, I switch it, but then I might have to fill in a blank. So instead of saying if they are congruent, I'm actually saying if two angles are congruent. Then they are vertical angles. Okay, so notice on that statement, I got rid of the two angles there. So it's not like you're taking the whole statement and replacing it. You kind of have to have it make sense as well. So you might have to fine tune a little bit. So I want you to think about that. Is this true or is it false? If two angles are congruent, are they vertical angles?
No.
Wait.
Okay, I heard yes, heard no. What would an example of no be?
220 degrees.
Two what?
90 degree angles right next
So basically I could do something like this. We'll call that angle 1 and 2. Are angle 1 and 2 congruent?
Yes.
Are they vertical?
No.
No. Another thing you could do. There's angle 1 and 2. They're congruent, but they are sure not vertical. So this statement works part of the time, but since I found a counterexample, this is false because I only found one. All right, so here you go. This is what I need you to do. Now pages 124 and 126. 1 through 10, 22, and 26. Now a little bit about this. We're approaching the end of the chapter, and in fact I believe we only have one more section left, so we're going to be looking at another test soon. 1 through 10, 22, and 26.